Hiya and welcome to Game Creation, and in this video we're going to be looking at the actual size of our game. So far you've noticed that I've used a kind of small window, which is not ideal for games. You kind of want the immersion, you want to get yourself into it. Now one of the problems we have with this is that every user, and we have to assume that every user who uses or who plays our game or uses our application, depending on what you're making, will have a different size screen. And this is what we call in web creation responsive. So you have a responsive website if it's got to understand that there's different resolutions. Games on like PlayStation and Xbox, there aren't as many resolutions because the console itself only supports certain types, like 1080 and 4K and all those, which are very defined sizes. But on laptops now, for instance, the new Surface Book has a resolution that's a bit mad. It's like 3000 by 2000, whatever it is. So you can't assume that everything's going to be 1080 or 4K when it comes to laptops and desktops. Actually, of my screens, I think only two of them are 1080. One's 4K, and this one obviously is 1080 but flipped around because I find that a lot more useful for coding because I can see more of the screen. So you can see already in my setup there's loads of different resolutions. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to be doing is just looking at what we've currently got. So if I click on frame, you can see that we're 640, so that's across, by 480 up. So that's 640 pixels across, 480 up. And if I run it now, and all I've done here is just opened up the game that we saved last week. So if I start this up, now there's no monitor that's that small. Clickteam defaults to this just because it's really useful because everyone can see it depending on no matter what monitor you have. And it would be really stupid to have a default that's massive and too big for your monitor. So it's quite useful they do that, but we don't need to do that. So we're going to just basically just play around with some of these settings. So a 1080 monitor is by default 920 by 1080. And I can just scroll that out a bit so we can actually see that. There we are, 1920 by 1080. And if I run now, you'll see nothing changes. That's strange. Why does nothing change? So let's click into frame again. You go, oh, 1920 by 1080. Now, what's happening here is that I've said for this frame and this frame alone, it's going to be 1080. So 1920 by 1080. And if you look, it's actually the right size. But you can see these kind of dotted lines here saying, yeah, but this is all they're going to see. The reason for that is you've got to change it within the game itself. And I can never find this one. There we are. So where's the second one? So the actual game itself is 640 by 480. And unless I change this, I'm not going to see the effect of that individual frame. So 1920 by 1080 in there. Okay. Let's have a look. Run application, and that looks a lot better. Now, it looks a lot better, but it's actually not a lot better. And the reason for that is that we've got space up here for the menu, and you've got the menu bar here, which is actually part of that 1080. So we've actually lost some screen space up here, but that's going to be added down at the bottom of the screen. Now you've also got the start menu at the bottom of the screen, so we're losing an awful lot of space. So we don't have 1080 up here. We just don't have that space. So if I close that down again, we can actually change some things here, and we can have a look. So the first thing we want to do is maximize on boot up, so that when I run it, it instantly maximizes it instead of like this, because it was like this before, it was kind of floating, and it maximizes it, which is good. We want that. I normally remove the headings, okay, because I don't need the ability to close, because that will all be done in game. I don't really want it to look like an application, but I do need to write some code to sort that out, because when I get rid of the menu bar, I'm not actually physically going to be able to close it. That's going to be a problem. So we're going to create a new group. I don't know, game admin, and I'm going to say keyboard upon pressing a key, escape. Oh, that one, and we're just going to end the application. So now I can have a way out. So if I always do this in the level editor, I don't know why. If I go back to where we were, which is this one, it was there, and get rid of the menu bar. So basically it will just be the complete screen now, and it's showing up as the whole screen now. Perfect, that's exactly what I want. Excellent. And so this feels like a full screen game. I put a little thing at the bottom there just to hide the start menu because it gets quite distracting. And sometimes when you look at the time I do these, you might feel sympathy towards me. But that is actually showing up on the screen, what I've got in front of me, which is good. So that's looking good. Now let's have a look at some of these other things. So disable close button you don't need if you've disabled the heading. No minimize, no maximize. Again, that's all done with the heading. The heading's the thing at the right at the top, so it's this bar here for Clickteam, so it shows the minimize and stuff. No thick frame, which is just the border around the actual application, but we've got full screen anyway, so it doesn't matter. And I don't really want to go too far into a lot of these because these are very specific to specific games. If it says resize display to full window size, that's if you've got a small application but you want it to be full screen for everyone, and it stretches out the game, which is not ideal. And centering the frame area in the window, we'll go on to maybe if we've got time later on. So those are the main things. Those really are designed if your full screen game is not doing what you think it should be doing, just check these out and just try different settings. But that's basically what I want to do, and we can have a look at some of the other bits. So that's what happens. So the frame rate is how many pictures you see every second, because obviously we've talked about videos not being continuous, they're just a set of pictures. So you'll see 60 pictures in a second for frame rate of 60. Frame rate of 60 is good, that's what we should be aiming for. I know that a lot of people are interested in 120 hertz, but I think that for a 2D sprite game, I think 60 is more than fine, especially when we start animating the player at much less than 60 frames per second. And again, all this stuff is stuff that if you've got an issue with a plugin or an extension, or you've got an issue with just too many things on screen, you could tweak these and see if it helps. These ones here are really good for applications. They're not as useful for games, but for applications that I've written before, I actually want them to be run when minimized, because some of the applications I do are affecting other things, and they're designed to run in the background, and run while resizing is really good as well, because it allows the user to kind of get the view on their application. They can stretch it out, but again, I don't use that for games. So there's just a few bits. You might notice that I've got DirectX or Direct3D 11. I think that is only for the 2.5 plus. You might have, I think 9 on the normal 2.5. It doesn't make a huge bit of difference for what we're doing in these tutorials, but it does help. There's a list of stuff that it does, which is always quite interesting. But today's session was just to make sure we had a nice full screen thing. You used to be able to also go into full screen. Where that is, there used to be a button that said full screen mode, but whether they've disabled that, allow user to switch to and from full screen. Don't really know how the user does that. Is there a little bit missing there? Yeah, so it used to be that it boots up into this kind of full screen mode, which was always like it made all the monitors turn off and then switch on whilst it changed the resolution of the monitor itself. But it's probably still there, but I never used it. It wasn't that necessary. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please keep the comments coming. If I've said something or you want to add something to what I've said, I'm always interested in discussing kind of new ideas and new ways of doing things. So please feel free to leave a comment below, and if you haven't subscribed already, please do so. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you want to see more from us, please click subscribe. We release videos every single weekday at 7 PM UK time. Thank you.